Diaz invited him to Mexico to build a railroad from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, while they were laying track there, his crew discovered one of the world's largest oil fields, the Portero del Llano. And this was interesting because here he is now in 1890 in Mexico. And I said, okay, I don't have him in the United States, but I've got the owner of the company in Mexico in 1890, building a transcontinental railroad. And the interesting thing about this was 12 years before the Panama Canal. So the Lord Cowdray Mining Company got the rights to build a railroad that went from the Gulf Coast of Mexico to the Pacific side. The railroad was 210 miles long, and goods were able to go from the United States to the Far East, to Japan, to wherever, and back and forth, and beat the Americans to the punch before they built their Panama Canal there. So this was a major thing. But how my guy became so rich was that when they were building this railroad that was going on both sides of the Gulf and the Pacific, they struck oil, and thereby they ended up creating the Mexican Eagle Petroleum Oil Company, one of the largest firms. But today it's known as Royal Dutch Shell. So the Shell gas stations today go back to Lord Cowdray, the Lord Cowdray Mining Company, because their first big find was out of Mexico in 1919. But here is the clue that got this all, the linchpin that got this all together. In 1917, I find out, Sir Wheatman Pearson became officially known as the first Viscount Cowdray. So that's how he got his name in 1917. And this was the most important clue that I would need to put all the puzzle pieces into place, because now I made the connection that Sir Wheatman Pearson was also Lord Cowdray.
Wow.
So he would keep himself incognito. So
no, that's what I first thought. But now the next question was, because that was my first question, I was right where you were. But then I go, wait a minute. Now I have to place him in 1934 at the office of the editor of the Stockton Record in 1934. So now what I had to do was get a biography to find out, okay, I know he was born in 1856. When did he die? Well, I found out that he died in May of 1927, 7 years earlier. So now I had to turn my attention to someone else, and then I reread the legend all over, guys. I said, okay, I got to read this all over. I got a headache there. I go, you know what? I'm going to figure this out. But it's not the owner of the company. So when I reread the legend, it just jumped off the page. I worked my whole life under the employ of the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So here it is, a faithful lieutenant that I'm looking for. So now I go to the different library in New York, and the commercial library there, and I get a biography on the life of Sir Lord Cowdray. Once I got it, I learned in the book that there were three other men that helped him build his empire. There were photos of Lord Cowdray and the three other men. I then, one by one, started looking into the backgrounds of the three other men. It was then that I learned that just as the man had claimed he had spent many years in the employ of the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England, I was able to use that information I found in that book to link one of the four men, who was John Benjamin Body, being the man who appeared in the office of the editor of the Stockton Record newspaper in 1934, claiming to be J.C. Brown.
So would have Body had enough money to pay for all of this? Did he make enough money working with
Well, yes, because what happened was when he was building, as I mentioned earlier, that's why I set it up when he was building the railroad there in Mexico under Porfirio Diaz to build the Trans-Isthmian Railroad. When they struck oil, being he was the senior guy on that job site, he became very rich, very, very rich. Lord Cowdray made him a multimillionaire after that oil find in Mexico. So those 20 years, he became a multimillionaire. So by the time he shows up in 1934, he claimed to be already worth $40 million. Lord Cowdray, his boss, when he died in 1927, he was worth over $300 million, and it was claimed to be the sixth richest man in the world in 1927.
Wow.
So here it is, once I ruled out the owner of the company and I found out it was one of his lieutenants, the next thing was I had to ask myself, well, he didn't live in the United States. He wasn't born in the United States. He's worked in Mexico all his life. How did he find the time, or what brought him to Mount Shasta or the area to search if he was domiciled, working, and living in Mexico? And I put it up to my higher self. And I said, what do you think? The next day, I was guided to go back to the library, and I decided, well, you know what? Let me look at border crossings through the United States, Mexico, or Canada, and see if I can find Sir Lord Cowdray, or his real name, Sir Wheatman Pearson, and J.B. Body, or anybody else that I found in that biography, in that book, coming in through Mexico or through other ports of entry in the United States around 1904, 1907, similar dates that were claimed in the legend. And then, so, interestingly enough, when I went and I looked at the border crossings, bullseye, I was able to find Sir Wheatman Pearson coming over the border in 1903 with J.B. Body, W.E. Sayers, and Robert Adams. So just as in the legend that J.C. Brown claimed that he had gone up there in 1904 in March, here it is. I have a border crossing not only with him, but with his boss and two other engineers. Then I look further into border crossings. In 1907, J.B. Body comes back, and now he brings in three other civil engineers with him named C.M. Yeomans, John McLaughlin, Fred Kleisner, and he also brings in a fourth man, John Gilmartin, who was his personal valet. Guys, nobody brings in a personal valet with him unless they're a millionaire. So here it is.
Yeah,
I knew I had the guy. Now now I'm sitting there and I'm looking. I says, I got it. I started looking at more border crossing guys, and now I look at 1910. And this is what was funny. And this is when I realized I was really onto something. J.B. Body lies on the manifest and says that he had never been in the United States before. Now here it is. I'm looking at 1904, 1907. Now I'm looking at 1910, and he's claiming to the U.S. Customs officer that he's never been in the United States. Now, why would he do that?
So did you come up with anything that places them in the Shasta area?
Well, just what I'm sharing now, because the Mount Shasta Resort closed down in the 30s, and so if the resort had still been open, I'd be able to probably see some sort of registrar or some sort of sign-in book to place them there. So no, I didn't have anything as far as that would go, because there's no records of a building that's been demolished.
All right, here's my question. Is there any border entries that you can find from any of those men in 1934?
Well, 1934 is when he shows up in Stockton Record and claims that 30 years earlier he had found these things up in Shasta.
Exactly. I'm wondering if he left in a hurry because someone was beating him to it. Maybe one of the other four men?
Well, interesting enough, the other men, I checked all border crossings for these guys, and they never came back through the border, the engineers that he brought with him, because those guys worked for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. They were loyal. I mean, C.M. Yeomans was someone who came in from Australia to work specifically in Mexico. John McLaughlin was another guy who was from Utah. Fred Kleisner was somebody out of Austria. So the people he brought in there on the second time with him, the engineers, were brought in under the instructions of Lord Cowdray himself, the owner of the company. So this was something that initially was done between the owner and J.B. Body together to orchestrate this, or bring my guys up there and see what you guys come up with. So, I mean, this was done through the company initially. Now, what was interesting then, in 1911, Lord Cowdray again accompanied J.B. Body back over the border, Laredo, Texas border in 1911. So the owner of the company not only comes in first in 1904 with J.B. Body, but he comes in again in 1911 to come back up to Mount Shasta again. So here it is. He's an active part in this in the first 7 years, after the discovery of the tunnel.
I'd like to find the stuff that they actually took out of there, because I'm sure that they couldn't have just not taken anything. You
Well,
know what I mean?
when this story was told to these 80 men there for the 6 weeks in John Root's home in 1934, Harry Noyes Pratt, the curator, demanded that J.C. Brown show him something, from this find, and so J.C. Brown told the museum curator that he would show him some contents that he had that was located in a vault in Laredo, Texas. Now, at the time, I did some research on this. There was the Laredo, Texas National Bank was on San Bernardino Avenue, which wasn't far from the border crossing where he crossed over. So he had a bank vault, I believe, in that bank, and that's where he had stashed some of the important papers and the things he found. And because he had come over the border there about 13 times that I have a record of, he picked his spots as to what he brought back over the border back into Mexico, I believe.
So this all starts to add up if he tells this newspaper guy that it's something at a bank in Laredo, then everything's starting to fall together here.
Yeah, well, he didn't mention Laredo specifically. He mentioned in Texas.
Texas.
But
well, still,
I was able.
That's,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So Laredo, Texas, that bank was founded maybe like 8-9 years before he had gone up to through the border there. So I mean that was the bank. There was no doubt in my mind that that's where he had this information, these pictures or treasure stash, whatever he had.
Mm. See, this from what I'm hearing you say, I'm starting to think that I'm getting the feeling like someone beat him to it. And the reason why I'm saying that, because I can't remember who it was or where it was in California, but there's a guy was on YouTube talking about a legend of some people going and finding a cave full of stuff in the 1930s. So I'm just wondering if any of the four men that were there were probably trying to beat him to it or something. Because we're talking about a lot of money and gold, so greed
Absolutely.
comes into factor.
Oh, it's a big factor. That's why I look closely at the other three men that he was with, and on the first trip, and then the other three men that he brought in on the second trip to see if I could tie any of them coming back into the country, and see if they were the ones who went out there and made. Because like you said, there's gold fever. He claimed, though, that during those 6 weeks of meetings that he had been kidnapped once, and he barely got away with his life. And he had said that after he told his wife and his in-laws about, what he had found 30 years earlier, or after that, they all wanted to go back to Shasta, to dig up what he had found. And mysteriously, they started dying one by one. And he also had an accident which was very serious, which he didn't elaborate on, but he claimed that he had been followed on many occasions and didn't say who they were. But I'm sure that people didn't want this secret to come out, and they did not want him coming into the country to change the existing paradigm at that time.
Yeah.
So you believe you've done some searching up there yourself, up
Right,
on
yeah,
Shasta yourself.
I'm going to get to that now, yes. So after I discovered all this on paper, I contacted the Stockton Police Department, and I informed them that I could solve the disappearance case of J.C. Brown. I was told by the police officer that the case was closed, but that I should contact the newspaper who put out the article on June 19th of 1934, and I was put in touch with a columnist by the name of Michael Fitzgerald of the Stockton Record. I put a call into him, and I shared my findings with him. I was able to provide him with accurate information without even having a copy of the original newspaper that was published in the Record on June 19, 1934, regarding the disappearance of J.C. Brown. After I gave him this information that there's no way I could have known, he sent me back a PDF file of the actual stories that were written, and then I was able to get more information. But at that time, what I learned after was that he claimed he was worth over $40 million. So that piece